Sally that girl in the kitchen. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sally that girl in the kitchen. In today's episode, I'm going to be teaching you how to make a sourdough starter. It has been one of my most requested recipes. I get phone calls, text messages of all kinds asking me how to make a successful starter that will build a beautiful sourdough bread. Well, today I'm going to teach you how. So the process of making a sourdough starter is quite simple, and there are very few ingredients needed. All we're going to need is some unbleached flour, whichever your preference is fine. It can be unbleached bread, unbleached all-purpose, wheat, anything you want as long as there's no bleach in it. We're going to need distilled water. We're going to need 100% pineapple juice. We are going to need something to stir with. I like to use a narrow-ended wooden spoon. We're going to need dry measuring cups, some measuring spoons, a mason jar with a removable lid, and then a larger hinge jar with the rubber gasket removed. I'd say that this one is about 38 ounces in capacity. And then I like to use a dry erase marker to mark my growth on the bottle as the starter grows, but you can use a rubber band to mark it. You can use whatever you want. So here we go. The first thing we're going to need is our mason jar. We're going to remove the lid. We're going to set it aside. Then into our mason jar, we are going to add 3 tablespoons of our unbleached flour. Remember, like I said, it can be unbleached all-purpose, unbleached bread flour, whatever your preference is. And you're just going to take your tablespoons right into your bag, and you're just going to shake off the excess. And you're going to add 3 tablespoons of unbleached flour. Now next, we are going to add 2 tablespoons of unsweetened pineapple juice. Now, the pineapple juice is only used on day 1. We're going to do this process for an entire week, 6 more days after today. But today's feed will take pineapple juice. For the rest of the week, the other 6 days, we are going to be using distilled water. So only today we will see pineapple juice, and then that's it, not again. So we're going to use 2 tablespoons of unsweetened pineapple juice. And you can just take this from a can of unsweetened pineapples in their own juice, or you can take this from a bottle of pineapple juice, whatever you're comfortable with, as long as there's no added sugar. And that's it. It's just 2 tablespoons in with the 3 of flour. So those are our proportions you're always going to remember. 3 of dry, 2 of wet. And then we're going to take our spoon. I like to use the back side, as you see. And you're just going to stir it up until the flour and the liquid are well combined. And then that is pretty much it for our ingredients. We stir it together, and then we're going to take our removable lid. We're going to place it off-centered on our mason jar. Find a corner somewhere in our kitchen. We're going to place our jar there, and we are just going to let it sit. And 3 more times today, I will come around and I will stir it up the same way I just mixed it, but I'm not adding any ingredients. That is going to be my daily process. I'm going to feed in the morning, mix it in, leave it on the counter, and then come back 3 more times during the day, mix it again, and that's it. And then tomorrow, which would be day 2, I'm going to repeat the same process, but instead of using the pineapple juice, then tomorrow I'm going to switch to the distilled water, and for the next 6 days, I'm going to use distilled water. So the proportions will be the same. It'll be 3 tablespoons of unbleached flour, and then 2 tablespoons of distilled water. I'm going to do that for 6 more days, stir it, leave it on the counter, always with our lid like this to kind of protect it for, from any bugs or anything funky. And then we're going to come around 3 more times during the day and stir it. That is it for the process of creating the starter for 1 week. So why the hinge jar, you may ask? Well, after a week of feeding, I'm going to transfer my starter into this jar because I'll be able to store it in the refrigerator, and I can close this hinge, and without the gasket, it will still be able to breathe, and I can store it in the refrigerator safely, making sure that nothing gets into it and it stays nice and fresh. Once you transfer your starter into the hinge jar, use your dry erase marker to mark the level of how much starter you had to begin with, and then stick it in the refrigerator until next week. So the starter has now been in the refrigerator for 1 week. It's been in there doing its thing, and now I pull it out because tomorrow I want to make bread. So tonight I have to feed it. So what does the feeding process look like? Well, I open up my starter, and I'm going to use the same proportions that I used daily, but now I'm going to use a larger quantity. So you remember that I used tablespoons for the daily feed the first week, but now instead I'm going to use quarter cups. So I'm going to use the same proportions. So I'm going to use 3 of unbleached flour and 2 of water, the same way I had done when I was using tablespoons. So all I do is grab some flour, shake it off to kind of level it, and add 1, 2, and 3. So since I'm using quarter cups, that's 3 quarter cups of flour. And now I'm going to use a total of a half a cup of water. But what I use is the same quarter cup measurement, so I don't forget my proportions. So it was 3 of flour, and now I'm going to add 1 and 2 quarter cups of distilled water. So half a cup. So now the only thing left to do is stir it up. I like to use the back of a wooden spoon because it's kind of narrow and it gives me a lot of space to work. But basically the idea is just stir it up until all the water has been absorbed. And once you've mixed all the water in, that's it. All you're going to do is you're going to take your lid, you're going to put it back on, and you are going to close the jar. Remember, we have no gasket, so it does have some breathing room. And now we're going to leave this jar on the counter overnight to see the growth that it has overnight and to be able to make bread tomorrow morning. Once again, I'm going to use a dry erase marker, and I'm going to mark the level of where my starter is once it's received its feed. And you're going to notice by tomorrow morning when I'm ready to bake bread, it's going to have grown exponentially, which is why I use this large jar, because it gives it plenty of room for growth. So look at just how much my starter has grown overnight. When I fed it last night, this is how much we had, and now it has pretty much doubled in size. A good rule of thumb is if I'm baking bread in the morning, I like to pull my starter out of the fridge the night before and feed it around 9 p.m. so that the next morning around 9 a.m. I'm ready to work with it. Of course, that's going to vary depending on the temperature and humidity where you live, but approximately about 12 hours is a good amount of time to let your starter grow. You want to catch your starter when it's at its best, when it has at least doubled in size. That's when it's ready to bake amazing bread. So what I like to do is I like to mark the level like I've done up until now, just to see how beautifully my starter has grown. So this is pretty much it. My starter is ready for use. I can bake a beautiful bread today. I'm going to have amazing results because I know my starter has at least doubled, and that's it. It is important to note that if I'm not going to bake bread today, if I decide that I don't feel like baking, something comes up, I still have to discard some of this starter. So what I would do is I would take out about maybe half a cup or 3/4 of a cup of my starter and discard it. And then I'd pop the bottle right back into the refrigerator. Now, of course, if you're gonna bake bread, then you're gonna be using that quantity for baking. But if not, you have to discard, because the idea is that every week, at least once a week, we're gonna pull the jar out, we're gonna feed it like I did last night, we're gonna leave it on the counter overnight so that it can grow, and then the next morning we will use. But if we don't, we still have to feed it weekly. Even if we don't plan on making bread, we pull it out, we do the same procedure, we feed it, and then we either use some or discard some. Then we put it right back in the fridge to do the same process next week. Well, how easy was that? Now you have an incredible sourdough starter waiting in the fridge just for that moment that you're ready to make a delicious loaf of sourdough bread. So don't forget to like, comment, and share, and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my recipes, including that beautiful sourdough bread that we're going to be making with this sourdough starter that you now have resting in the refrigerator, just waiting for that moment. See you next time. Sally, that girl, in the kitchen.